Hello everyone, this is Schrader, back with a video finally. I don't do videos too often. This video is featuring my dog who insists on making noises tonight. So if you hear any panting or weird sounds that an old dog would make, then that's exactly what you're hearing. So this is going to be a breakdown of my track. He's not panting. Tanner, stop. This is going to be a breakdown of my track Loneliest Days, which is on my Reflections album that released back at the end of December of 2018. It's available on Spotify and iTunes, and you can stream part of it on... You can stream most of the track on YouTube if you just look up Kamron Schrader Loneliest Days. I'm sure I'll get around to uploading it to my channel at some point, because I need to bring more attention to my channel. But some people have asked me to break down my progressive house tracks, which I haven't done in a while. So you'll notice that I've loaded in the master right here. This track lags the shit out of my computer, and even when I show you a preview of it here in a second, you're gonna hear laggy clicking noises. There's nothing I can do about that. I don't have money for a new computer right now. This one is definitely an old computer. But next time I'm in the market for a new computer, I'm going to get a Mac, which I will be getting specifically for Logic Pro. Okay, so here is part of the track. This first 16 bars is just a generic drum loop for mixing purposes, and then it goes into a first little breakdown. So I'll stop that right there. A lot of people liked how that hit and how the pads sound all lush. But I'm gonna just break down everything in order real quick though. So the drums are pretty simple, pretty generic house drums. Just solo them right here. So the kick, pretty simple. I'm just going over the drums for anyone that might be new to this. The kick and the click. The kick is generally the low end, so it's this part, and the click is that part that sounds like the high end part of a kick. Sorry about the heater; it's freezing. So. This, I've been using Christian Hertz kicks. He's behind the old Dinga tracks and some of the old I think EDU or EDX tracks, and he's also behind Helvetic Nerds. I have no idea what he's doing these days, but he used to produce some of the best progressive house, and he has left us with this amazing sample pack. So for this track, voice crack. For this track, I use this kick for the low end. Just like how that sounds. I didn't really want to use a huge bassy kick for this track because I wanted the actual bass line to be the strong part of the bass. And then The under drums is what the click is from. So this pack is called Helvetic Nerds Progressive Anthems. I got this from Beatport like 3 or 4 years ago. Last I looked, I couldn't find it on Beatport. It might be up, it might be on the Control Samples website. If you can't find it, I'm sure there are other ways that you can find this. Wink, wink, nod, nod. I did buy it. I did buy it personally, though. But for progressive house, for the specific type of progressive house that I make, if you're going for anything that resembles my style, Talamanca's style, Lumidelic style, Leshes style, this pack has all the loops you could ever need. Stuff like this sounds pretty good. So I think all the loops might be from this. Yeah, that one is, that one is, that one is, and that one is. So see how lazy I can be with my tracks just from using this pack. There's a hat loop, it's a perk loop, there's another perk loop, and there's another perk loop. And I do minimal processing to these. I know that this specific loop has a lot of unwanted low end, so I just cut the lows, but you should be cutting lows out of, you should be cutting unwanted lows out of every loop. And that's all I'm doing on most of these. The ride isn't too prominent in this track. These are Vengeance samples. Vengeance Essential House. People shit on Vengeance, but it's Vengeance packs are really good for hi-hats, and the Vengeance Deep House packs have some really good kicks in them for melodic progressive house. Most of my hats are usually going to be from Vengeance packs, just because there's so much you could do from them, and there's so. Man, sorry, my mic just cut out. My USB ports are going out. There's so many hats to work with in Vengeance that you may as well just scrap those. So this is a bit of a higher end part of the hat, and this is the more sustained part. I don't use rides in every track, but sometimes it just works really well. And in this case, it's playing right here. Okay, so, and by the way, I'm not gonna, if you wanna, I would prefer that you buy my tracks, but if you want to go grab it, there's probably places that you can grab it. I'm not gonna play the entire thing on my own channel. Hats, same thing, Vengeance samples. So with hats, a lot of times you're probably gonna find yourself layering two or three to find the right sound for your track. But something you want to do is a lot of hat samples come with way too many high mids or low highs, mid highs, whatever you want to call them. So you're going to cut all of this unwanted stuff, which you can kind of see in the background here. You're going to cut that generally around 700 hertz, but you'd kind of play it by ear. You're going to lower the lower frequencies, and then you're going to give a bit of a boost with a bell shape. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, for the kick is being compressed very slightly, and then it's being EQ'd, and then, okay, please don't crash me, Fab Filter. I would be really pissed off if you did that. Okay, well, it's gonna do this. you're going to, you want, bleh, I can't talk. Okay, so without this, there's too many mids in the kick, so you want to lower the mid part, or the higher low part, whatever you want to call it, so that you're only hearing the really bassy part of the kick. So that's what you're doing there. If you don't get rid of those higher frequencies in the bass part of the kick, it'll fuck with your bass line, and you won't be able to hear your bass line as well. So there's the drums. Pretty simple. There's generally no need to overdo your drums with progressive house. Move on to the bass real quick. The bass is one of my favorite parts of this track, even though I'm proud of the entire track. So I produce tracks pretty fast, and that's because I'm lazy and use presets. But one thing that I don't skimp out with on presets is bass. I make basses from scratch pretty much all the time. I used to use all 4 octaves for my bass lines, but I've been doing that less and less lately, because it's just not necessary. It is for some sounds, but usually two oscillators is good enough. And there's no rule to making your bass lines. Usually you want an amp envelope that looks like this. Usually you want an amp envelope that looks like this, with very few exceptions. Distortion is an option. This has overdrive distortion. Oops. And it's very slight. You might not even be able to hear the difference on the YouTube video. The only other distortion that you might want to use on a bass is decimate, and you will kind of play it by ear on the amount and the dry wet, but with decimate you won't want to have your dry wet up too high because it can become overpowered. So as far as waveforms go on bass lines, you usually want to have a saw, and then you can mix square waves with saw waves, and you will want to play with octaves. Sometimes you'll have 2 that are at -2 octaves, but usually you're going to have a mix of a -2 and a -1 octave. And then detuning, you do not want to overdo your detuning on bass lines. It can sound just kind of weird. Usually 10 o'clock would be the highest I would go, but I usually don't go past 9 o'clock. This only has a little bit of distortion. This has about a good amount of distortion. Usually a low cut filter. Always a cutoff envelope on the mod envelope. And I just kind of play with the decay, the sustain, and the release on the mod envelope. And you'll play with that, and you'll play with the filter control cutoff. And then you'll mess around with the resonance a little bit. Don't give it too much resonance. And then sometimes if you want a little bit more punch to the bass, you can do a pitch envelope on your second mod envelope and just raise the decay by a very tiny bit, like it's 0.34, and sometimes I do less than that. And you'll raise the amount up all the way, and then if you can't hear it, put a volume envelope on it as well and raise it all the way, and you'll be able to hear it. So that's a good bass sound on its own. And then I basically did the same thing with this. This one is using a pulse wave, and an H pulse, and a saw wave, with a bit of detuning. And it still has a pitch envelope and still has a cutoff envelope. Sounds pretty good. So these are going to a bus. I don't do too much processing on my bass lines. These are presets from the old template that I learned from years ago, Telemanica's first template, and I do that just because I can, because I'm lazy, and it works. So the next thing, these last things, the EQing is lazy. The last three things are also lazy. They come over from when I was producing trance. I'm saturating, which is distortion, the bass, and then I'm fattening it. So that's without the saturation and fattening. And then TP bassline. TP bassline is an absolute necessity in all of your tracks, no question. It's going to come before your sidechain, in which case the fruity limiter is the sidechain. It's going to be the last in line before the sidechain. This is important, and I'm not, well, you can tell a bit of a difference there, but you kind of have to just mess around with it on your end before you start noticing the difference. But basically what this does is it lowers any frequency, or it monos any frequency that is below what your set frequency is here. And this is your frequency knob that you can mess with. So now if I set it to here, everything that's below 1047 hertz is going to be monoed. Now that would sound fucking weird, but generally 185.4 is the sweet spot for your bass lines and for your entire track. The reason that we want to do this is you do not want your low frequencies to have any stereo width, because it'll sound really bad on any sort of decent sound system. If you're using shitty earphones or headphones or whatever for your production, which is totally fine if you know what you're doing, you're not going to be able to tell what your bass sounds like. So this can kind of save your ass sometimes when you're using shitty headphones, because it'll guarantee you that your bass line is at least going to be mono whenever you render it. So I use that on the bass line, and then I'm using that on the master channel, just to make sure that anything below this is monoed, because any really low frequency that has stereo width is going to sound fucking weird, and that's not a good thing. And then the last thing that I have is some sidechain. It's being heavily sidechained. Let's show this. This is your typical FL Studio sidechain. The ratio is all the way up and the threshold is down pretty low. It's probably at like negative 26 hertz. Sidechaining in FL Studio, real quick. So I've got the kick, and then I've got the sidechain kick. These two are the same samples. This one is just a ghost kick, basically. So with this, with your sidechain kick, you're going to go over to the envelope settings. You're going to bring the decay, attack, or delayed attack, decay, sustain, or release all the way down. And I'll unmute this so that you can hear what it sounds like. So that sounds super different from our low kick. It doesn't have as much of a tail, and that's exactly what we're going for. So when this is sidechaining, what we're doing, or when this is sidechaining stuff, we only want that snap parts, that snappy part of the kick to make things duck out of the way as far as volume goes. You don't want your entire kick, tail, and everything to make things duck out of the way. You just want the snappy part of it. Now, there are some certain styles of progressive house where you would use more sidechain kicks, or more of the kick, but usually for those you can just avoid having a sidechain kick altogether and instead use kickstart, which will just make everything duck out of the way for you. And it's even got some nice shapes to it. I've used kickstart for a couple of tracks, and it works. It just, for this specific style that this track is in, kickstart would not be a good idea. And it's using kickstart is for the wrong style is a mistake that a lot of people make. Your best bet is to simply get used to doing actual sidechaining. So that's it for the bass and sidechaining. The chords are pretty typical of my progressive house chords. As you can see, they're absolutely destroying my CPU, which chords will do that if you're layering them and they have delay and stuff, and especially if there's a lot of voices, which there's quite a few, but that's just part of the package that you're signing up for. So chords, the chord sounds are where you can be pretty lazy. I just use presets. A lot of times I use four layers for my progressive house tracks. Sometimes I only use 2. I never only use 1. Actually, you know what? I may have just released a track that only uses 1. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember. So as far as presets go, this preset pack that I used for all these chords is called Silent Definitive Collection. It's from Freshly Squeezed Samples, and it's easily the best preset pack out there for silent. It works for uplifting trance, progressive house, progressive trance, all sorts of shit. Really, really, really good preset pack. Props to whoever made it. So when you go to make your chord sounds, you're gonna just layer any of these plucks. Usually one of the dead mouse plucks, and you're with some of the others. Dead mouse toy is my absolute favorite. The only thing that I mess with this particular preset is sometimes I usually raise the cutoff a little bit. I think it starts out at like 11 hertz, and I have it at 17 on this track. What else? Sometimes with certain tracks you will add decimate distortion, and we're not going to add very much of that. For your typical Talamanca style chords, you would raise that to like 2.62, and you would put the dry wet at about halfway, and that sounds really good. But I only use that for certain tracks. Second chord. Now there is a bit of thought put into the layering. I'm not just layering random presets. I wanted the chords in this track to be really stabby, to go along with the bass line. So I changed the mod envelope and the amp envelope on this preset, to make it real stabby. And a lot of these presets have too much delay, or the wrong delay, so you might mess with the actual delay, and you will probably bring the dry wet down. Usually for chord sounds, you're not going to have more than 50% on your dry wet on delay, or else it'll just sound really bad. And then this one, this is another sustained sounding chord. I messed with the amp envelope a little bit. This is my saw layer. Usually you're going to have a saw layer, and by saw layer I mean something that you're going to automate the cutoff on. So, where's my Pluck 3? Okay, maybe I didn't automate that in this track. Let's find out. No, I didn't automate it. Okay, so those are the chords. The processing is really simple. These are based off of Talamanca's original processing. I don't usually do any different processing. Come on. Okay. They're being sidechained. Sometimes I compress my chords, but they're usually good enough as is. Now this is part of the automation. So when you're bringing your chords in, let's see, it's doing it right here. When you're bringing your chords in or out, you want to kind of filter them, and that's what Simplon is doing. I think that's, yeah, it's happening here at the outro too. So you can fade chords in like this as well. In this track, they're only being faded out. You usually do a mix of both, but for the intro, like usually in the intro, like from bar 16 to 32, you're gonna fade your chords in. From nothing to just being fully in the track before this first breakdown, or whenever the bass and drums come in. But for this track I didn't do that because I like to vary my intros a bit. Simplon is definitely the best filtering plugin. I've seen people use I think it's called Fruity Fast LP or Fruity Filter or something like that, and it just doesn't sound as good, and it adds a bit of a weird resonance to your track, whereas this is just a pretty standard. That's gonna reset because it's being EQ'd. This is just a pretty standard EQ. Like we can, like, say we're at the intro of the track, well, we can start them out right here and just kind of lower and raise these. That's kind of my crude demonstration, and it doesn't sound weird, it sounds good. So FabFilter Simplon is the definite go-to plugin for your filtering. Also, if you can help it, you want to use ProQ2 for most of your EQing. The original ProQ works as well. I just like some of the improvements that they made in ProQ2 over ProQ1. Now, if you're just doing a low cut on something like these loops, then you can get away with whatever your DAW's built-in filter or EQ is, which in this case is parametric EQ2. And in fact, you don't want to have ProQ2 on everything in that case because it'll lag your machine up. But for any in-depth EQing, you want to use ProQ2. So there's the chords. Pads. I got a lot of compliments on the pads, which is kind of funny because the pads are probably the laziest thing in this track. I did do something different with the pads in this track compared to other tracks. So those sound really light, but they sound really lush whenever you bring the chords in. And it just this works. So what I did with the pads in this is I'm actually cutting, I have no idea what this is at. I'm cutting the lows out at around, come on dude, why are you doing this? We're frozen. Okay. We're cutting the lows. What the fuck? I think I just messed that up. Okay. Cutting the lows really low. Oops, forgot. Let me just focus. Whoops, I fucked up again. So that's what I'm doing. I was wondering why the fuck it wasn't showing up at the intro. But it's been quite a few months since I made this track, so I kind of forget sometimes where everything's happening. To get these pads to sound lush, and I'll go into the sound design with the pads here in a minute. It's pretty fucking lazy. But the art with pads is kind of in your layering and filtering. No one cares if you make your pads from scratch. Hate to tell you guys that. So generally, when you're producing progressive house, you're gonna cut your pads, the low frequencies, at about 200, which is what this is doing. And this is just a bit of, this is here to just play it safe to make sure that absolutely nothing gets past 200. Now this is also cutting things at 200, which is almost a little redundant, but we're automating it later in the track. This is the pads high cutoff, so if we play the pads, that's what that's doing. Now what this is doing is it kind of controls how many lows, and in this case mids, are coming out of the track or out of the pads. So you can only hear the highs at this point, and that works really well with this track. So what we're doing is here, we start when the pads come in at in the intro. They are, you can't hear them because they're being filtered in, because the high cut is too low for the highs to come through, and the low cut is too high for any mids to come through, which is fine. It fades in. So for the outro, or for the intro, and only for this first intro, we have the cutoff going down to 200 hertz, so that some more of the mids come in, and that's kind of important because we're going for a bit of a lush sound. See, that sounds really full. Those sound really full. It's kind of nice. Now, later on in the track, when we get to the big breakdown, I'm not bringing the cutoff back down, or the low cut back down. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of stuff going on we have brought in a bass pad, and the bass pad is kind of obnoxious, but that's intentional. It just kind of works with the mood of the track that I was going for. And at this point I wanted the bass pad to be more prominent than the actual pads, but they still go together really well. So for the actual pads, and I'll get to the bass pad after this, they are just 3 layers. This is a preset from Silent Definitive Collection from earlier, called Pad. The only thing that you might want to change on this is if you're automating the cutoff in your pad bus instead of individually. Some people like to automate their cutoff individually, but I'm lazy and I can get away with doing it on the bus, and it'll still sound good. You want to move the cutoff all the way up because you're going to be automating it elsewhere. This is another pad from Definitive Collection. It's really good. That's kind of the weak part of Definitive Collection. There's only a few good pads, but that's fine. Because usually when I'm doing pads, I'm using Nexus. Nexus is kind of looked down on by some producers, but the longer you're producing, the more you realize that some listeners don't really give a shit about certain sound design, because no average progressive house listener is going to come across this track and be like, oh, Kamron used huge ambient pad from Nexus 2 in this track. What a fucking lazy ass. No one is going to do that, so you can get away with that. And you want to make sure that these are all on the same octave. Nexus automatically has everything an octave lower for some reason. I boost my pads by an octave, which you go to the miscellaneous functions here and you right click to set the root note of your pads. So it starts here on C5, and to lower it an octave you right click on C4. And to demonstrate what that does, just to drill things in, here's what it sounds like on C5. Here's what it sounds like on C4. This one is not being lowered. Sometimes I have all of my pads boosted by an octave. Sometimes I have one that's not being boosted, and that's usually just to have more of a mid pad. So pad number 2 is acting as a bit of a mid pad here. That totally depends on the track. You don't have to have any mid pads, because despite what some people are going to tell you, you can sometimes get away with just having high pads. And then this is another high pad. It's just a bit of a texture pad. So that sounds pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how the pads turned out on this track. Pretty simple function. They're being super duper compressed by Pro C2 or Pro C. Compression wise, always use Pro C. 1 or 2 doesn't matter. I have both, and there's hardly a difference between the two. They're being cut. We've already gone over this, and then they're being sidechained. There's no rules to how much you need to sidechain things, by the way. Just kind of do that shit to taste. Bass pad is probably not being. If I know myself, I'm probably not doing any processing to it other than what's on the bass bus. This is a D&B bass, actually, that I used in another one of my tracks. Yeah, no processing. It's just going straight to the bass bus and getting the regular bass processing. This is using Serum, and hope, yeah, it loaded. And again, I generally make all of my basses from scratch. This is a drum and bass bass. It's a Reese. I wanted to see what a Reese would sound like in a progressive house track, and holy shit, it sounds great. all that's going on in this. You don't need to pay attention to most of this. It looks super complicated, but it's not a very complicated synth. It's an init preset with a saw wave. The octaves are going down by 2. There's 3 voices. Usually for a respace, there's going to be anywhere from 2 to 4. There's an assload of detuning. There's a filter on it. MG low 24, which basically means it's a 24 hertz filter. There's a lot of resonance, and then the cutoff is down, and you get a sound that sounds like this. So, yeah, there's a super quick respace tutorial for anyone that also is interested in making drum and bass, but I'll be getting around to making a drum and bass tutorial here pretty soon. And then these instructions for how the space was created is simple enough that you should be able to translate it to silent pretty easily. The only thing I have learned about Serum that I wish I would have known before releasing this track was the width. You do not want much stereo width on a respace, so ideally this would be around 33%, and that sounds a lot better. Now it does still work in this track with the full width. Oops. But usually you don't want very much stereo width on your respace, or your bass pad. Bass pad and respace, a typical bass pad, there's not too much difference between that and a res. And then sometimes you won't use a proper bass pad at all, you're just going to use a sub bass. So we're working our way down here. So we've gotten pads and then everything above that so far, if you want to look. So first thing that shows up melodics wise is the piano. Just a nice little piano melody. I really enjoy making piano melodies, and I actually spend quite a bit of time on them. I mean, sometimes they come straight to me, so I don't spend much time on them, but a lot of times I spend a couple hours working on these until I'm absolutely happy with what I've got. And by a couple hours, that's not a couple hours straight, but like just messing with the track and making slight adjustments to whatever I started out with. A tip to making your piano is to copy your pads or chords or whatever you've got as a bass line and paste it in a sampler. And let's raise this up just for demonstration's sake. Then you can start with any notes that you've got going on in your track. So there's a D sharp in this first chord, so I started out with a D sharp, just not on the same note, obviously. Actually, it is on the same note because I just raised the pads. God, I'm an idiot. And then there's also an F6, so I do a D sharp and an F sharp. Now there's not a G sharp in this note, but I'm just kind of working in key. There's a way to get your notes to highlight. Let me look for this because this might help a lot of people. I can't find it. Okay. Okay, so helpers. For what I'm doing right now, you want to have ghost channels on. That kind of displays what I've got going on in the background. That's how I'm seeing the pads. You want to have ghost channels on pretty much all the time. Scale highlighting, that's what I was looking for. Put this on automatic. So basically, when you have this on automatic, and sometimes it does get things wrong, so you still need to learn your scales. This has detected that this track is in B major, which isn't necessarily right. It's actually in G sharp minor. But I think the keys in both of those, the notes in both of those are the same. So it doesn't really matter that much. All of these light notes, you see how this is light and this one's dark? This note's dark, this D5. That's because if you have automatic grid highlighting on, it detects the key of your chords, and it's like, okay, D sharp or D is not in this scale that this track is being written on, so we're gonna we're gonna darken out D so that you don't use it. Okay, so these light notes. Any of these I can use in this track, and it will sound mostly good. There's an exception with this one being the dissonant key. So I can use any of these notes, and I have used those notes to create a melody, and that'll work. So that's how you kind of tell. If you're colorblind, it might be a little hard to tell. But I'm not colorblind, so I don't really know what to tell you as far as that goes. And when it comes to creating piano melodies, you're probably not going to create anything too special right away. It just takes a lot of practice. But it eventually starts coming to you. So the next thing that we have that comes into this track is a little transition melody pluck thing, which is right here. Now, this is the result of just fucking around with presets and accidentally creating something that sounds great. I knew that I wanted to have a transition style pluck in this track because I had been listening to a bunch of uplifting trance at the time, which makes use of little transition melodies like this, and I wanted to try it in a progressive house track. And these are basically just chord hits. See, that sounds really trancey. This was originally what I had, and then I was like, I want that to sound lower so that it's more prominent, or sound higher so that it's more prominent. So I took the low notes and I put them an octave higher. It totally changes the sound of it, even though they're the same chords, and it sounds really good. And this plays throughout the track, every 8 bars. The next thing that we hear in the track is a sine arp. It's really subtle, but when you're producing progressive house, a lot of stuff is just stacking melodies and having a bunch of subtle stuff that is in the background filling up the blank space. Now, again, I use my chords that I've written as a bit of a roadmap. So F sharp is my top note for the entire track, so I started out with F sharp. And this is a pretty simple arp. Nothing too crazy about it. Sound design is really simple. And on its own, it sounds a lot different from when it's actually playing in the track, but that's just because the note placement and the side chaining makes it sound a lot groovier. So we've got three offbeat notes right here, and then we've got three that are not. And that's, this particular pattern plays every 2 bars, as you can see. This one plays every 2 bars after, aside from at the end, which has a slight variation. And you can probably get away with making variations at the end. It's just something that I like doing because it's something that I personally notice whenever I'm making tracks. It's one of those things that I am picky about. Sine arps are really easy to make sound design wise. It's just one sine wave. Don't do more than that. And you mess around with your inp envelope until you have something that you like. I have no idea why the filter control has even been touched on this, because we're not filtering it. The only thing that we're automating on this is the pitch. So you see this part right here. We're adding a bit of a click, because if that wasn't there, it would be a little harder to hear the melody, because the thing with sine waves is that it's very easy for them to drown out with all the other things in the track. But if you add pitch and mod envelope, then you will it'll be easier to hear them. That high pitch stuff that you hear is the decimate distortion, which is pretty typical for a sine pluck. I just raised the amount till I was happy with what I heard, and then I lowered the dry and wet to where the wet sound wasn't so high that it was obnoxious. And judging, that might be the mic. Actually, never mind. I was about to say I don't think I processed this. Okay, so it's being compressed. It's being EQ'd. Just very slight boost to the highs, which is this right here. It's frozen. This is boosting some of that decimate distortion. These peaks right here, these two and then these two, those are the decimate distortion kicking in. So I'm kind of boosting that. And then I'm just boosting the highs very slightly with this one. And then I'm low cutting it just to make sure that this low stuff doesn't get through. And then I'm using Bionic Delay. I think I said this in my last video, which has been a long time ago. Bionic Delay is the #1 delay plugin. It's free. I can't remember the site that I got it from. It's probably on that generic free VST site that has all sorts of shit on it. This is the best delay plugin. Now the only other delay plugin that I think even compares to this is Classic Delay, which is also a free delay plugin. So both of your best delay plugins are free. Go find them. Mess around. You'll find the one that you like the most. The mix is your dry wets. The feedback is how much delay that you're actually getting. The groove is how much how off the delay is from the actual note that it's on. I think this is a fourth. I don't know my musical notes. I think this means that it's, yeah, that's a fourth. So that's got a fourth of delay. This is like 1 out of 2. Or that's 1/16. This is 1/8. This is 1/4, and that's like 1/1 or 1/2. This is an easy plugin to figure out how to use, and then it comes with, if you don't even have to figure out how to use it because it comes with the presets that you want. I'm not sure if you can actually see this with OBS. I haven't figured out how to get that to display. And it's being sidechained. I sidechain everything because it's necessary. Oh, by the way, the chord stabs. I forgot to go over the processing for those. Same thing. It's being EQ'd. It's being compressed. There's a slight mid sound that's being dipped. They've got some delay and they're being sidechained. Please stop being frozen. I'm sick of ProQ2 freezing me whenever I try to reopen it. That's only been doing that since I installed FL20. So later on in the track, in the last 16 bars before the breakdown, we introduced the main Pluck, which is pretty typical of my style for anyone that's familiar. Okay, so this is two different plucks that are going together with each other. Again, started out with that high note, or that top note of the chord line, which is F sharp. And with these melodies, I really just mess around until I get something that sounds nice and groovy or nice and peaceful or something like that. And preset wise, sometimes I use presets, sometimes I don't. This one I actually created the sounds from scratch. Usually when I'm creating these little bell sounds or pluck sounds or whatever for the main melody, I'm using Spire. Spire is the #1 plugin for creating unique little bell sounds for progressive house. Now for this one I got away with just using a stabby little saw pluck. Man, my nose is running like fucking crazy. Pretty simple. Again, just messed with the amp envelope till I had something that I liked. Messed with the mod envelope till I had what I liked. It's being low cut in the filter type, or low pass rather. Both of the oscillators have their retrig on. That just adds the stabbiness of the sound. The one with one voice has a tiny bit of detuning, and the one with 8 voices has no detuning. And again, that's just something that you mess with. If you're using retrig and you use too much detuning, it's going to sound obnoxious. So keep that in mind. And then the resonance is up a little bit. For this one, that's a nice little sound. This is just 8 voices of an H pulse with retrig on, no detuning. I messed with the amp envelope to get what I wanted. And I liked the attack sound that I got from the attack being up. There's a low pass and the filter was messed with. The attack is up on the mod envelope just to get a bit of a nice little swell sound. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. What's Pluck 3? What the fuck? There might not be a Pluck 3. There's probably not a Pluck 3. That's probably there from early production. It's being compressed, pretty generic. It's being EQ'd, pretty generic. Close, please. I'm tired of... These don't freeze up unless I'm recording. It's very annoying. They're being delayed. One of these is 1/4 delay, and one of them is 1/8 delay, and one of them might be dotted note. I'm not entirely sure. And then of course it's being sidechained. So I didn't go over the processing for the piano, but that's because these are pretty similar. These are being sent to a send channel. Now, if you're on FL20, you don't have these channels to the side. If it's an old project like this one, it'll still have the channels to the side. But it doesn't matter. Any channel can be a send channel. So to create a send channel, we're going to click on this little thing right here, this up arrow, to send this to this. And now I turned the volume down so that not all, the entire volume isn't going up. And then I'm using Valhalla Vintage Verb for the reverb on the Plucks. And I probably selected a preset and then just increased the decay a little bit. And then you want the mix for any reverb on Ascend to be at 100%, or else you're gonna get some weird sounding shit that you don't want. So let me see if I can load this. Yeah, so the mix is at 100. Decay is at 4.3 seconds. And the preset is Bright Hall. Color doesn't matter. That's literally just the color of the that's the color of the plugin. So yeah, that's just kind of hear that reverb. Same thing with the piano. The piano is being sent to its own send channel. Oh, and by the way, for whatever reason, automating the send volume in different ways in this track. So I'm automating the send volume here for the melodics, but for the piano, it's being sent in full to the piano send, and I'm using the volume meter to adjust the volume. I don't think it makes a difference. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Piano reverb. I like my pianos to be nice and lush. This is a preset that I got from Arcuit, who is an uplifting trance producer. And I kind of mess with the decay and the attack and prelude as needed. But I use this preset as a starting point. But I change it for every track. So we've gone over pretty much everything in the track now. The only other things are the effects. Do not overdo your effects in progressive house. It doesn't need to be they don't need to be too prominent. There's reverb and delay on both of these, and they're both being cut. You don't want any low frequencies in your effects, especially when they have reverb on them. This next one is a sweep from the Helvetic Nerds Progressive Anthems. It has some good effects. And I'm not using any effects on it because it's already fine on its own. Or any automation shit effects. I was right the first time. It's late and I'm on pain medicine. Give me a break. So for this part, so right here is that part where we've got the intro piano and just pads. And that eventually, after 8 bars, brings in the chords and the bass, and it sounds really good. Now I needed a transition effects for that, so I got this from Ad Brown Progressive House Essentials Volume 1. I haven't gotten around to getting Volume 2 of his pack yet, but I'm sure it's amazing. Ad Brown Progressive House Essentials Volume 1 is easily another pack that you want to have. As a progressive house producer, it's fucking perfect. Both of these transitional effects are from his pack, which sound like this. And that is used again for the same purpose in the breakdown, the big breakdown. This is a reverb kick, pretty self-explanatory. And that's it for the effects. I really don't overdo it with the effects. I used to overdo it, and then I realized that it was starting to sound really boring and too predictable. So I stopped copy-pasting my effects everywhere, and I like doing that. Getting a drink real quick. When the sine arp is brought in, I'm just going to start going over anything that I know that I've missed. When the sine arp is brought in, which is right here, it's having its volume automated to go from 0 to 100 after 8 bars. So it kind of fades in. Now, when we get to this part of the track, we're kind of transitioning to the breakdown here. The bass pad volume is being brought in, which is right here. The percussion bus, which is unnamed, but it's this right here, has a fab filter simp line on it, which is making the percussion go away. You can barely hear it right there. The bass channel envelope. The fuck? I have no idea what this is. Channel volume. Never mind. That's the automation for the bass. For the bass volume. So the regular bass volume goes down while the bass pad volume comes up. So you go from this to this really smoothly. And you want these to have, so these are going down with a tension of 16%, and this is the bass pad, wherever it is coming up with a tension of 16%, and that's to make sure that everything goes smoothly as far as going from one to the other. Because if we had a point where like say the bass pad was way louder than the regular bass, but the regular bass was still pretty loud, that would sound really weird. So we want it to sound equal. If this had 0 tension, then I would want this to have 0 tension. And the tension is this part right here that changes the slope of what the automation is doing. And you can see how much your tension is right here whenever you are mousing over the little tension bar right here. So the other thing that I do, and this is used twice in the track, is here at the end of the breakdown. I've got a filter and a flanger, or flanger, I don't know how to pronounce that, I've never heard anyone say that word, here on the master filter. Flanger, if we want to hear what that sounds like this. Nice little effect. And then the vocoder changes the sound of everything as well. And then there's a low pass to make sure no bass is getting through at that time, which is this master filter 2. Please go away, I'm sick of this freezing. So yeah, there's the automation for that, and that just adds a bit of a transitional effect. And then that is used again right here. This is the outro breakdown. And it's used again before we get to the outro part of the track, which is this bit right here. So, yeah. Ignored this. Pluck 3 doesn't even exist in this track. Pad filtering I'm pretty lazy about. You'll notice that I kind of just left it alone. You will be more attentive to your pad filtering if your track is more empty melodic wise, and the less melodic stuff that you have in your track, the more prominent certain things like pads will be, and that's when you want to automate that stuff more frequently. Otherwise, I only generally automate pad stuff in the intro and then the big breakdown, but in this track it wasn't necessary to automate in the big breakdown. Kick volume, the sidechain kick volume goes down in the transition to the breakdown. This is just get rid of sidechaining, because if you're transitioning from your intro to the breakdown and you go suddenly from full sidechain to no sidechain, it's just going to sound weird. So you want to automate the volume of your sidechain kick, which will basically just, it's not a volume control, it's just a sidechain control. Oh yeah, so one thing that I know that I forgot to go over was the clap. Claps are something that I kind of struggle with. In fact, you can see that I use a lot of layers in this track. Sometimes I only use 2 layers, and sometimes I use as much as 5. I try not to go over 5 because then it starts sounding bad. These are just assorted samples from Ad Brown's pack. Sometimes I use Vengeance samples, sometimes I use Ad Brown samples, sometimes I use both. These are being compressed. The attack is actually being raised a little bit on this. And then it's being EQ'd slightly. And this is gonna freeze again. Great. Go away, please. Come on, dude. Okay. I really wonder why that freezes whenever I'm recording. It might be because I have my mic in or something. We've pretty much gone over the entire track now. If there's anything I've missed that you're curious about, let me know in the comments. I will include a link to a place that you can stream this full track in the description. It is on Southern Sun's YouTube channel. Southern Sun has been, they've been supporting my music for quite a while now, which I'm very thankful for. So, yeah. If anyone goes and looks at my Reflections album and sees a track that they want me to break down, let me know and I'll do it. Because I'm always looking for new video ideas. It's kind of the reason that I don't ever upload stuff, is because I don't ever know what to record. And I think I've got around like 500 subscribers right now, and people are always asking me, why aren't you making videos? So yeah, hopefully this was insightful for some of you. I'm going to try to do more progressive house stuff, including producing a track from scratch. Like recording the full production process of a track. That'll just be really difficult though, because I scrap so many of my projects. Like if we look, my only naming scheme for my tracks is that prog trance, which is what I used to call this stuff, 139. So this was my 139th project for progressive house, and I might have like 20 or 30 released tracks. So I really don't release very many of my projects. I've got some stuff that is totally finished that I fell out of love with after finishing, and they'll never be released because I fell out of love with them, and I don't want to release anything that I don't like myself. My album is full of tracks that I have had on repeat at one point or another. It's got a progressive trance track, 2 drum and bass tracks that I'm very happy with, and a bunch of progressive house stuff, including a track called Soledad, which is a throwback to old 2008-2009 style progressive house. So yeah, I hope everyone liked the video. there's anything I can do to improve. I know my voice is boring. I can't improve that. Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Bye, guys. Have a good day. Bye-bye.